All right, everybody, welcome to week three. This week we'll continue talking about response prompting, and specifically, we are going to focus on most to least prompting and graduated guidance. Just some important information is that you have quiz one on systematic instruction coming up. Today, when we're talking about most to least prompt, we're going to talk about the prompting hierarchy related to most to least prompting. For both that and graduated guidance, we're going to be talking about fading, planning for fading, and then also looking at data collection. I'll leave you to read the learning objectives. And I do want to let you know that you have a couple of projects that are coming up over the next couple of weeks to months. And one of the first ones that you'll be doing for video application one is that you will be implementing the system of least prompts to teach a chain skill. So just want to let you know that that will be coming up before too long. All right, let's get started. So when we're talking about most to least prompting, this is one of the oldest and most extensively used instructional strategy for students with complex support needs because often we are using the most to least prompting when a student is initially learning a skill or a student needs a really high level of support. And so it is a strategy that we use often with the students in our program and in our classrooms. Just want to let you know it is an evidence-based practice for things like communication skills, self-help skills, fine motor skills, and academics, but it has also been really effective in teaching things like functional skills, play skills, vocational skills, and social skills. So if you look at all of these different areas and then think about the number of behaviors that fall under these different domains, then you can see that this is a really beneficial strategy to use, again, specifically with our students, or especially with our students who need the higher levels of support. Not only is it an evidence-based practice, but it's also been used across a variety of ages, from very young children to adults. It's been used in general education settings, in separate settings, in community settings, on job sites, and it's been used with students with intellectual disability, autism, developmental disabilities, and more. So this is a strategy that you will use with your students, across your career. So what I want you to do really quickly is just stop the video and I want you to do a quick write, 1 to 2 minutes on what do you remember about most to least prompting from your ABA class, all right? Go ahead and stop the video now. All right, so let's move forward and talk about most to least prompting. Well, it is an instructional strategy, again, where we use the prompting a hierarchy, and that is going to be a hierarchy that is individualized for your student. And you're going to be working across that prompting hierarchy from the most intrusive prompt to the least intrusive prompt. And so you're going to gradually decrease that level of assistance as the student becomes more independent or proficient in the skill that you're teaching them. Now, this is part of systematic instruction, and it is another errorless learning instructional strategy because, again, that's what our goal is. Our goal is errorless or near errorless learning because we do know there are going to be times students are going to make mistakes or errors. We do use a prompting hierarchy, and as always, we want to make sure that that is individualized for the student. In contrast, however, to the system of least prompts, when you're using the most to least prompting system, what you're going to do is after you give the task direction, you are going to immediately provide the student with the most intrusive level of assistance or that most intrusive prompt from their prompting hierarchy. And when you think about that most intrusive prompt, I want you to realize that is the student's controlling prompt. It is the prompt that is most likely to result in a correct response. And so usually we start to fade these across sessions, and we'll talk about that more in just a second. So again, just like with the other prompting hierarchies, we want to make sure that we are not teaching prompt dependence by not fading the prompts that we're providing. So with most to least prompting, you're going to fade it over time, again, as the student responds to a least intrusive prompt. And you're going to be doing some probes, and I'll show you how to do that in just a few minutes. So as they start to become more proficient or they require a least intrusive prompt, you are going to fade those prompts over time. And eventually we're going to completely fade them out so the student is able to perform the skill independently. But I do want to remind you that because we often use this strategy with our students who have the most complex support needs and have needs for the highest levels of support, that learning doesn't always occur immediately. It can take weeks even for a student to learn a skill, students with whom we're using the most to least prompting strategy. So I don't want you to become, discouraged. We have to continue to work on it. And this is also a time that you would really want to make that database decision by looking at your data and making sure that the most intrusive prompt is that student's controlling prompt. So previously, when we were talking about the system of least prompts, we were looking at instructing a student where we gave them the opportunity to respond independently before we prompted, and then we moved from the least to most intrusive prompt. Well, in contrast, when you were using the most to least prompt, and I think of it because I usually have my prompting hierarchy in my head is going from the least to most. So I just think about it going in the opposite direction because again, you're going to work from the most intrusive prompt all the way to the least intrusive prompt. And in your prompting hierarchy, how many prompts would you typically have? If you thought 2 to 3, yes, that's where we are. And so as always, when you're using most to least, you're going to provide the task direction, immediately provide the most intrusive prompt, and then you're going to fade that over time. So again, just reiterating what that is, because I don't want you to think that you provide a response interval. We do not provide a response interval when using most to least prompt. We immediately provide that controlling prompt. So just a reminder that you want to have 2 or more prompts. You're going to start with that most intrusive prompt, that controlling prompt. And one of the things that's really cool about this instructional strategy is that you can use it for discrete and for chain skills. So if you think about all those different areas that we talked about earlier, that this is either an evidence-based or has been effective in teaching skills in those areas in the past, and then you think about the discrete and the chain skills within, like, let's say, social skills or within academics, this is a really awesome, awesome instructional strategy. And it is one that I encourage you to use throughout your teaching career. So what we're going to do real quick, that's just going to take a second, is I want you to look at these prompting hierarchies and tell me, or not tell me, but in your head, think about which prompt is the most intrusive prompt in this prompting hierarchy, okay? So looking at the first prompt, the prompting hierarchy, what is the most intrusive or controlling prompt in that prompting hierarchy? Right? If you thought gestural prompt, you are correct. Let's look at our next prompting hierarchy. If you pinpointed full physical assistant as the most intrusive prompt, you are correct. All right, let's look at another one. And in this one, the most intrusive prompt or the controlling prompt is modeling. And let's look at one more prompting hierarchy for the most intrusive prompt on the hierarchy. And that would be a partial physical prompt. All right, so hopefully you got all those correct. So again, when we're using response prompting or when we're teaching children in general, our goal is to provide them with as much support as needed and to encourage independence. And then we want to make sure that we are fading those prompts and that support over time because our ultimate goal is for students to be able to demonstrate or perform those behaviors or skills independently. So let's talk about fading. When you're using the most to least prompting, we already talked about that you're going to start with the most intrusive prompt and that you fade that prompt over time. And so typically you are going to fade it from session to session to session, not within lessons, not within lessons. I'm not saying that you couldn't do that, but I would not encourage it. It's typically done across lessons. And so let's look at what that fading might look like over time. So we're just going to come up with a pretend student, and this student's individualized prompting hierarchy includes the most intrusive prompt. His controlling prompt is a partial physical prompt. The next least intrusive prompt is a model, and then finally verbal. So when we are looking at planning for fading, our fading schedule may look like this, and this is just one example. It doesn't mean that it has to be done by a week. This is an example of a fading schedule for this specific student. And so what the teacher's plan was is to start in week 1 with a partial physical prompt. In week 2, move to a model prompt. In week 3, to go to a verbal prompt. And then by week 4, the student is performing the skill independently. Well, what do you do if you get to week 3 and the student is not able to perform the skill correctly with a verbal prompt? Well, what you're going to do is you're just going to back it back up and go to the model prompt. So if you work with the student and you attempt a verbal prompt and it is not working with the student, then what you know is that is not the controlling prompt. It is not the prompt that is most likely to result in a correct response. So you're just going to back it up a little bit. You're going to do a couple of more sessions with a model, and then you're going to probe. And we'll talk about probing later to see if the student is ready for you to fade that model prompt down to a verbal prompt. So what I want you to do is to stop the video since we don't have a friend with us right now. And I want you to just do a quick write. Remember, this is like 1 to 2 minutes maximum. And I want you to write, what does fading look like when using the most to least prompting strategy? All right, go ahead and stop your video. All right, I look forward to seeing your responses. And just so you know, this is not counted right or wrong. I don't want you to worry about that. It's a way for me to gauge where your knowledge is, what you remember, and what your prior knowledge is, what you're bringing into class. And then I'll be able to assess to see what your growth is or what your areas of need are as well. All right, so we're getting ready to watch a video. And with this video, I want you to look for a couple of things. First, what do you notice in the video when the teacher, and we're looking at fading for the most to least prompting strategy. What do you notice in the video? What is the student's individualized prompting hierarchy from most to least? And I encourage you to write that down as you're watching the video, so get a little piece of paper beside you. Are there any parts of the instructional trial that's missing? Is there an attentional cue? Is there an instructional cue or a task direction? Is there a behavior? And then is there a consequence or a response or behavior? And then is there a consequence, which could either be positive reinforcement or some type of error correction? And then I want you to think about the teacher's reinforcement. What do you think about it? All right, let's get ready for our video. Make sure our volume is up, and here we go.
Match. Good job matching. Match. Good job. Match. Good job matching. Match. Good job. Match. Good job matching. Match. Good job. Match. Good job, Jason. Match. Amazing. Match. Good job. Match. Good job, Jason.
All right, so again, take a second, stop the video and write down, what did you notice in the video? What was the student's individualized prompting hierarchy from most to least? Was there anything missing from the instructional trial? And what did you think about the teacher's reinforcement? Go ahead and write those down and then come back. All right. Well, there's one thing that I want to say. Please stop saying good job because if you heard that teacher over and over again, every time I believe the student's name might be Jason, she would say, Jason, good job, good job, good job. And what I want you to remember is this is supposed to be positive reinforcement. And I want you to see, do you think that is reinforcing to that student? I know that for myself, what I hear over time is wah, wah. Wow. And so she did a really good job with the fading of, demonstrating the fading of most to least prompt. But instead, I would encourage you to say something like, if you say good job, Jason. I love the way you match the hair clip with the hair tie. Those are both things we use to hold our hair up, to be a little bit more specific with that, giving behavior specific praise and stay away from the good job. Because again, as I watch that video, I always hear that in the back of my head. All right, so for this video, I want you to stop and see how are you feeling about the most to least prompting system so far? Are you like, yep, I've got it. I feel good about it. I'm doing okay, or nope, I'm completely lost. As always, I encourage you to write down your questions. I encourage you, if you need to put them on your discussion guide so that they will be there and you can refer back to them when we are in class together. But if you have any questions, please write them down. I always encourage questions. So if you have any, just let me know. And that is the end of this video. I will see you on the next one.